Reg, thank you very much for that. Can I just say I would stand up and sing the national anthem? Firstly, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to your conference. It's a great honour for me to be among so many who have done so much for Northern Ireland over the years. And can I say it's a huge privilege for me to be the Shadow Secretary of State in Her Majesty's official opposition. And can I also say I'm very grateful for the warm welcome I've received on my reappointment. And can I also say a special thank you to your leader, Mike Nesbitt, for seeing me almost immediately, despite the pressures on his time, and offering me his hand of friendship, as well as his advice and insight into the current difficulties and the possible progress that can be made. I'm very appreciative of this, Mike, and I was pleased to be here for your speech this morning. And can I also thank your wife, Linda, as well, for the welcome. Can I also say to the Ulster Unionist Party conference that in your two new MPs, Tom Elliott and Danny Kinahan, you have representatives who work hard to stand up for their constituents and stand up for Northern Ireland. They have already earned the respect of the House of Commons and been a source of reliable information for me. Indeed, that is also true of your representatives in the House of Lords, Dennis Rogan, and can I say a special word for the Chair, Reg MP. I think sometimes when we look at the challenges that we face today, we should also remember the huge contribution that many made in years gone by. And I just say this to Dennis, but also to Reg. I think there are people who are famous. There are people whose names trip off the tongue very easily. And there are others who, through their integrity, their hard work and their dedication, were just as much a part of bringing about the peace and progress in Northern Ireland as others who are better known, and Reg MP is one of them. And whilst mentioning those representatives, let's not forget your MLAs, many of whom I know and have the privilege of working with, who've done also so much important work in Northern Ireland. And finally, can I just say, I do this because I always forget to do it in my own constituency in Nottingham, which causes me a problem afterwards. So I do it here because it's the right thing to do as well. Let's not forget all of the local councillors who in their own communities work hard, doing what's best for them. And it's important to remember that for many years they were the only elected representatives in those communities. And they worked hard and did their best and continue to do so as well. The reason, Mike, that I've mentioned these people is because I wanted to say to you something I think is really important at this conference. It's easy sometimes for us to criticise politicians and to become frustrated. But I do believe that the politicians you have work hard at all levels to do their best to tackle entrenched problems as Northern Ireland moves out of conflict and moves on from the divisions of the past. So as I say, it's a great honour for me to have this opportunity at this important time for Northern Ireland to speak to you today. And my message to you is that whilst respecting properly and fully the devolution settlement, Westminster still matters. And what is said by Westminster politicians is still extremely important. So as I've said, I welcome this opportunity to come here today to speak to you. To come here to reassure you. And I want to be robust and clear about Labour's position here today. I know, as Reg mentioned quite properly at the beginning, I know there have been questions about our position with respect to agreements, to terrorism, and indeed to the future of Northern Ireland. So let me be absolutely clear. I speak for Labour in Northern Ireland, and what as I say is our policy, remains our policy and will be our policy. We are committed to honouring the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and all of the subsequent agreements. We believe in the maintenance of a bipartisan approach. And above all, we believe in the principle of consent. There can be no change to the constitutional position of Northern Ireland without the agreement of a majority of people in Northern Ireland. And let me also be clear that the primacy of the rule of law is paramount and that there can never be any justification for terrorism. That is what I have said. That is what I have said in the media, but more importantly, as Tommy and Danny will know, that I have said in the House of Commons consistently since I took on this post, and I will continue to do so. No ifs, no buts. Our policy remains the same, and let that ring out from this conference here today. But the report published earlier this week on paramilitaries did contain some uncomfortable statements. So again, let me say paramilitary groups have no place in Northern Ireland. And whilst the report says that the remnants of any groups now have a solely political focus, there are still links to criminality and organised crime. And I want it also to be clear that that is totally unacceptable and cannot be tolerated. It is unacceptable for any group to be involved, as the report says, in fuel laundering and in drugs or extortion. It's gangsterism, and it undermines communities and the work of decent people and their families. In a democratic society, there is only one body to enforce the law of the land, and here in Northern Ireland, that is the PSNI. The rule of law is paramount, and on that there can be no compromise. So the ongoing talks will have to address how to respond to the issues raised in the report, and will need to do so as soon as possible. But we cannot and must not forget the threat that there continues to be from dissident Republicans who continue to try to use terror to undermine the progress that has been made. They cannot and must not win. And so again here today, to reassure you, I want to restate my support and our support for the PSNI in the important work that they undertake on our behalf to keep us safe, and indeed the bravery and dedication that their officers show every single day of the year, day and night. As I said earlier, I want to stress to you that whilst respecting the devolution settlement, Westminster still matters. It is almost certain that Westminster will soon start to legislate to implement the Stormont House Agreement. And let me congratulate all, including the Ulster Unionist Party, on their role in bringing about that agreement. Of course there are challenges. Of course there are difficulties. But I commend you, Mike, and all of your team for seeking to deal with the legacy of the past and for once again how difficult issues can be addressed. And I respect the Ulster Unionist Party's position, and I understand their decision to leave the executive. But I do hope the outcome of current and future talks will be that everyone may find a way back to the executive table. But no matter how hard it is been for politicians to find a way forward in dealing with the past, we must always think of the families of the victims. Those families, those survivors, their families should always be in our thoughts as we seek to find a way to move forward. And I say to the government that on this, it needs to progress on the basis of the widest possible agreement as to the shape of the Historical Investigations Unit, the work of the Independent Commission on Information Retrieval, and the independence of the Oral History Archive. Issues of staffing, independence, public confidence, disclosure, and the rejection of amnesties have to be addressed. The search for truth and accountability goes on. But also let me say this to the government, that if the legislation is to proceed at Westminster, there must be proper time for scrutiny and debate to take place both in the House of Commons and indeed in the House of Lords. But let me also say this, Mike, and reflecting indeed on some of the important things that you said in your speech earlier. It's not just through legislation that Westminster is relevant. I feel it's now time for a fresh approach, a reinvigorated approach, a renewed approach by Westminster. The excellent Heenan-Anderson report published recently which was commissioned by my predecessor, and let me pay tribute to the work that Ivan Lewis did in the role that I now have in the work that he did, and pay tribute to him, and he commissioned this report. But that report, published recently, called for a refocusing of the joint working between the Westminster Government and the Northern Ireland Executive. Many of the debates in Westminster focus quite rightly on matters of national security or on the latest political challenges at Stormont. But decisions made at Westminster still have a huge impact on Northern Ireland, as obviously, even with the devolution settlement, it operates within a fiscal and monetary framework set by the Treasury. Stormont clearly makes its own decisions, but are there further tax changes, for example, which can or should be made? What more could the Treasury do to recognise the particular challenges that Northern Ireland faces as it moves out of conflict? I've suggested, for example, as others have, that perhaps one of the ways out of the current welfare reform debate is for the Treasury to look at targeted finance, supporting efforts to tackle long-term worklessness, anti-poverty strategies, economic inactivity, and as Mike Nesbitt said earlier, above all, mental health. The trauma caused by the long period of conflict makes Northern Ireland a special case and has special circumstances among the UK regions, and as such, in my view, requires specific tailored policy responses. The overall prevalence of mental health problems, and it's a really interesting idea you had, Mike, in your alternative programme for government that you laid out. The overall prevalence of mental health problems in Northern Ireland, a problem everywhere, but here in Northern Ireland is estimated to be 20% higher than in England or Scotland. The Treasury must work to ensure that there are funds to address this, partly as a legacy issue. But these problems do not stand in isolation, but are interlinked. Poor mental health can drive worklessness and economic isolation, which in turn drives poverty. And the prevalence of long-term unemployment, those who have not worked for over 12 months, accounts for over 40% of the total unemployment count, demonstrating how difficult it is to break that cycle of poverty. And the intergenerational nature of the problem means that children who grow up without a working role model are much less likely to secure employment when they enter adulthood. That has to change. And there are ways, I believe, in which increased cooperation between the Treasury and the Northern Ireland Executive could, for example, create more opportunities to do that, more enterprise zones. Could the idea of city deals, as the Heenan Anderson report suggested, be extended to Northern Ireland? I don't know, but let's explore it and see whether it's possible and whether it could work. As the report stated, Northern Ireland's greatest asset is its vibrant, talented, well-educated young population. And we must make the most of this valuable resource and ensure that every individual, no matter where they come from, is able to achieve their potential. That's what the report said, and I couldn't agree more. And Mike, it's great here at the conference just to say to you, as somebody who's come in, it's great to see at your conference here today, and somebody else mentioned it, so many younger people and young people here being involved in politics. Let me just say this. Let me just say, go off script here a bit. So let me don't panic. Let me just say. So let me just say this. I know young people. It's often said young people aren't interested in politics, and this isn't about Northern Ireland. This is across the whole of the UK, and actually, from what I can see of it, is true across many parts of Europe as well. I don't think it is that young people aren't interested in politics. I don't think that at all. I think what it means to establish parties, and I'll use my own as an example to the Labour Party as well as to others, is that they've lost faith in the ability of those parties to represent young people and to actually drive change. And it's our challenge, our problem, not theirs. And I think, seeing young people here today is, as I say, a great tribute to the party, and we're trying hard to get as many young people involved as well. So Northern Ireland has the highest retention of students of any UK nation or region, with 91.9% of those who studied here gaining employment within 6 months after graduating. And every business I speak to talks about the need to retain a high-skilled workforce. but it's also vital to build the critical infrastructure to attract the businesses of the future. So let me pose this question. As in the rest of the UK, we debate the third runway at Heathrow, HS2, and appoint Lord O'Donis to run a new infrastructure commission. What are the Barnett consequentials of that for Northern Ireland? And how can any of this thinking be applied to Northern Ireland to support the work of the executive? So how does the work of that new infrastructure commission, how can it be made relevant to Northern Ireland? Or how is it relevant? And so the point is, Westminster continuing to recognise its broader ongoing responsibility to support Northern Ireland as it moves forward. And one of the success stories of the Northern Ireland economy over the last 2 decades has been the rapid expansion of the tourism industry, and I met their representatives in London recently. But we know that some of the major issues face that industry, like the rate of VAT charged on accommodation, the processing of visitor visas, and the rate of air passenger duty, are issues that need and can be addressed by Westminster. And that's why a more reflective, reinvigorated, renewed approach by Westminster could be and would be so warm welcome. There is a thirst and desire also for us to look at how we support the voluntary community and third sectors. I believe profoundly that social change can drive political change. And I've seen that with groups that I've met over the last few weeks here in Northern Ireland. But difficult circumstances continue to challenge this sector. Funding becomes harder to secure, and so we all need to redouble our efforts to speak out on behalf of the people we work with. And the Westminster Government needs to continue to recognise the crucial role that the voluntary community and third sector plays, as we all seek to challenge the barriers to change in Northern Ireland. And of course, as David mentioned, we have, and people will have different views on this, we have in the coming months, citizens across the UK will have an opportunity at some point to vote in a referendum that will define the UK's relationship with Europe and the wider world. And we need, in that debate in Westminster, to consider as part of that discussion and part of that debate what the impact would be on Northern Ireland, and to consider that and to debate that. And can I also just say, David, we were proud as a Labour Party to play our part in maintaining the union between England and Scotland and being part of that campaign, which we felt was important as well. But look, one of my prime purposes of having the privilege of coming here today, Mike, was to reassure you about Labour's approach. But I also wanted to say that as many as you have, we can also drive on socially and economically, and the Treasury has a key role to play in this. So much progress has been made in Northern Ireland. It is unrecognisable from just a few years ago. New jobs, more investment, tourism have created a Northern Ireland that is vibrant and open for business. But political challenges will emerge. Challenges do exist, and huge difficulties remain about combating the continuing issues of sectarianism, paramilitary activity, and indeed criminality. But there is once again a chance, an opportunity for Northern Ireland to take another step forward as it moves out of conflict. I believe that my role is to support that democratic process within the parameters of the agreements that were historically reached. Our task now is surely to try to accelerate the dividends from that process, so that poverty, worklessness, peace, the despair of mental health, and decades of underinvestment in infrastructure become problems of the past. So much has been achieved, so much progress has been made, but there is yet more to do. Now is the time for that refocused effort for Westminster to recognise the continuing role that it can play in supporting progress, and that the challenge and the rewards are economic as well as political. The challenges remain, but the rewards are great. Thank you for inviting me here today. I look forward to working with you to secure that better peace and that better future that we all want. Thank you very much indeed.